Have you ever found yourself hearing the same name in your mind again and again, long after the person has left your life? Not just a passing thought, but a subtle haunting. Like their name has taken up residence in the quiet of your inner world. It echoes while you're doing dishes, when you're driving, just before sleep. And no matter how much time has passed, it returns, uninvited, unresolved. This isn't about obsession. This isn't about weakness. It's something more mysterious, more sacred. In Jungian psychology, there's a phenomenon called an autonomous complex. It's like a small personality that forms around an emotional wound or an unmet longing. It has its own voice, its own rhythm, and sometimes it speaks by repeating a name. Not necessarily the name of someone we're meant to reunite with, but the name that once held the power to awaken a part of us we had forgotten. So what if this repetition isn't random? What if the person isn't the message, but the symbol? Neville Goddard taught that the imagination is the womb of reality, that what we feel internally, we give life to externally. The soul doesn't use facts. It doesn't always use logic. It speaks in image, sensation, and sometimes names. Because a name can carry 1,000 emotional codes. It can hold the memory of who you once were, who you tried to become, what you never dared to say. So before you try to silence it, pause. This isn't just about them, this is about you. And the name you keep hearing may not be asking you to go back to them, but to return to the you they once awakened. This is a story about memory, about longing, about unfinished cycles and sacred repetition. This is not about obsession. This is about soul memory and the voice inside you that refuses to be forgotten. Some names do not simply return as memories. They return like tides, rhythmic, inevitable, familiar. You hear them in quiet moments, not because you miss the person, but because something remains unspoken. Something sacred was left incomplete. There is a part of the psyche that refuses to forget what was not fully lived. A boundary never claimed, a truth never told, a desire denied so deeply it became silence. This is not always about longing. It is about an unfinished ritual, a thread still tied to the soul of a moment that never closed. And so the name returns, not to resurrect what was, but to remind you what was not. Many carry the belief, if I still think of them, it must be because we're meant to reunite. But the soul does not always call us toward reunion. Sometimes it calls us toward resolution, because psychic energy left unresolved does not disappear, it recirculates. CarlJung described this as the nature of the unconscious. What we avoid does not vanish, it becomes active. It forms patterns, complexes, dreams, compulsions. It finds a voice, and sometimes that voice is a name. There is no blame in this, only a quiet need for closure without finality, not a conclusion, but a recognition. It's like the sound of a bell. The person rang it, but it wasn't about them. It was about the sound they awakened in you. And though their hand is long gone, the ringing continues, because something in you was never allowed to settle. The name that returns is not summoning the past. It is summoning your awareness. A name is not just a person. It is a symbol, a memory, a door, and it will continue to knock until you open it, not to return to them, but to finally return to yourself. There are names that return not because of who the person truly was, but because of what they carried for you without knowing it. In the early stages of connection, the soul moves quickly. It projects longing onto presence, possibility onto form. And in that projection, someone becomes more than themselves. They become a dream, a doorway, a mirror of an inner figure long buried. Jung called this the projection of the anima or animus, the idealized image of the opposite within, seeking expression in the outer world. So what we fall in love with is not always the other, it is the symbol of the other, the unseen partner within ourselves, now given shape through their body, their voice, their gaze. This is why grief often lingers, even when the relationship was brief, because we are not only mourning the person, we are mourning the image, the archetype, the invisible thread of meaning we had wrapped around their name. There's a quiet confusion that can follow. They must be my twin flame, or I wouldn't feel them this deeply. But sometimes the depth of the feeling isn't about destiny. It's about the depth of the wound the projection touched. Neville Goddard spoke of the imagination as reality's womb. What we feel, think, and dream with emotional intensity becomes a kind of truth in our nervous system. So when we imagine someone as our soul's answer, even if they were never capable of holding that role, the body still remembers the fantasy as if it was real, and when it ends, it doesn't end, because the role was never finished, because the symbol was never understood. It's like mistaking the actor for the role, and when the curtain closes, mourning the loss of the character, without realizing the play was written by your own unconscious longing. The name that repeats is not always theirs. It is the echo of a part of you, still searching for a face to wear. When a name returns again and again, it's not always because the memory is strong, but because the meaning is unfinished. Repetition in the psyche is not always a sign of obsession. Sometimes it is the sacred rhythm of something the soul has not yet digested. We often hear, "Let it go," "Distract yourself," "Focus on something new." But repetition is rarely solved through resistance. It is not noise, it is a signal. A ritualized way the unconscious tries to bring meaning to the surface. The psyche, Jung said, is purposeful. It does not randomly fixate. It brings symbols forward, names, faces, dreams, because they carry something that wants to be seen. And when those symbols are ignored, they return with more force, not to harm us, but to complete their journey into consciousness. Neville Goddard spoke of the imagination as the medium through which spirit expresses itself. And in that same way, repetition can be seen as imagination's pulse, a repeated image asking to be held not with judgment, but with listening. The name, when repeated, becomes like a drumbeat in the forest. It's not trying to pull you backward, it's calling you inward. Because the soul does not forget what the ego avoids. It remembers in dreams, in sensations, in symbols. And when something is not fully felt, it is repeated. The name that reappears in your thoughts is not always a message from the past. Sometimes it is the voice of your present self, asking to be remembered more fully, not with longing, but with presence. Some names do not return because of who the person was. They return because of how you felt in their presence, how your spirit opened, how your voice softened, how even briefly you remembered a version of yourself that felt alive. And now, long after they've gone, their name lingers, not as a call to return to them, but as a memory of the self you became when seen through their eyes. There is a wound here that is often misnamed. It's not the absence of love, it's the absence of the feeling that you were finally becoming someone real. And without that mirror, you feel yourself fading again into roles, routines, quiet forgetting. We often tell ourselves they were special, meant for us, the one. But what if they were not the source, but the reflection, not the magic itself, but the condition in which the magic could finally rise to the surface? Jung would say, this is the archetype of the mirror, the one who shows us who we are becoming, not because they give us something, but because their presence allows something dormant to awaken. The danger is mistaking the candle for the flame, believing we need them to feel lit again, when in truth they simply illuminated what was already inside us, waiting. Neville Goddard once said that imagining from the end is the key to creation, and yet many are trapped, imagining from the absence, from the illusion that only that person could make them feel that way again. But the truth is softer and more sacred. You never needed them. You needed the part of yourself they accidentally set free. And now that their name returns, It may not be to call you back into love, but to remind you that you are still capable of becoming that person again without their presence. Because what you miss most is the light you saw when you were finally looking inward. There are names we no longer speak aloud, but which echo inside the mind like a whispered chant. At first it feels innocent, a passing thought, a memory. But slowly, repetition becomes rhythm, rhythm becomes trance. And without realizing it, we begin to cast a spell on ourselves through the sheer act of remembering, not remembering them, but remembering longing, because the name no longer holds only their presence. It now holds your ache, your craving, your unresolved ritual of waiting for something that has already passed. Neville Goddard taught that feeling is the secret, that what we feel with persistence, we imprint. So when the name of someone lost is carried like a mantra, filled with sadness, urgency, or hope, it begins to root itself in the body as identity. This is not about blame, it is about awareness. There is a way the mind tries to keep what the heart never fully received. And in doing so, the repetition becomes a way of keeping the wound open, as if healing it would mean letting go of the only proof that love once existed. But the soul does not ask for amnesia. It asks for presence. It does not need to forget the name. It needs to remove the trance it created, because when a name becomes a spell, the person is no longer the point. The name has turned into a symbol of your own inner captivity. It's like carving their name into the water and then wondering why the tide keeps returning with the same sorrow. Some names do not bind you because they were powerful. They bind you because you repeated them while you were still in pain. And healing begins when the repetition no longer deepens the ache, but begins to reveal the part of you that's still waiting to wake up. Not every name that returns belongs to a person. Some names belong to an archetype, to a living myth inside the soul. These are the names that carry more weight than they should. They feel ancient, electric, fated, as if your meeting wasn't chance, but a chapter written long before either of you arrived. They were not just someone you loved. They were the healer when you were broken, the muse when you were silent, the seducer when you were afraid of your own desire, the destroyer when you needed to be undone. And so, even long after their presence fades, their name lingers, because it was never just a name. It was a doorway to a story larger than you, a psychic initiation. There is a temptation to dismiss this, to reduce it to fantasy, to overreaction. They were just a person, we are told. But in the symbolic world of the psyche, they were much more. Jung taught that when an archetype is activated, it can feel like madness or revelation, because the energy it carries is not personal, it's collective. It draws from the vast river beneath us, where all human stories live. And so, their name replays like a mantra of the myth you touched, a chapter of your soul's journey that asked to be lived through them until it was not. But here lies the danger. When the person is mistaken for the archetype, the bond becomes imprisonment. You begin to believe only they carry the magic, only they can give it back. Yet Neville Goddard reminds us, the true power is not in the person, but in the feeling they awakened. And once you recognize the symbolic charge, you can release the individual without losing the meaning. It's like following a golden thread through a dark forest. You think the thread is leading you to them, but one day you stop and realize it was never about where it led. It was about what it revealed in you, about what myth your soul had been silently waiting to live. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. There are moments when the soul cannot speak in words, so it chooses symbols, sounds, sensations, and sometimes it chooses a name. Not because the person is reaching for you, but because your inner voice has been waiting for you to listen. And it knew that their name was the only one you still recognized in the silence. This is how the soul creates conversation. It does not send messages in clear lines. It wraps truth in metaphor. It takes the shape of what once broke you open, because only through that doorway will you enter willingly. You may believe, they must be thinking of me too. That's why I keep hearing their name. But the repetition is not always about mutual connection. It can be an intimate illusion created by the psyche to keep you close to something unresolved. CarlJung knew this pattern well. When the unconscious wants your attention, it doesn't send logic. It sends images. It sends longing. It sends a presence that feels other, but lives within. And Neville Goddard spoke of the imagination as a divine echo chamber. What you impress with feeling returns to you not only as external circumstance, but as symbolic invitation. A whisper in your own language, spoken by your own soul. This is not telepathy, this is inner poetry. The name that replays might not be a message from them. It may be a message through them. A voice inside you, using their name as a bridge between who you were and who you're becoming. It's like hearing your name carried on the wind. You turn around, expecting to see someone behind you, but the forest is empty. And then you realize it wasn't them calling after all. It was you. There is a quiet violence in the way we are taught to forget, move on, let go. Don't think about them anymore. But the soul is not mechanical. It doesn't heal through deletion, it heals through meaning. When a name keeps returning, it is not always a failure of detachment. It might be the beginning of a sacred retrieval. Something in the repetition is not clinging. It's calling. Calling for understanding, for presence, for wholeness. There is a widespread belief that thinking of someone means you haven't healed. But in the symbolic language of the psyche, thinking is not always longing. Sometimes it is integration. A final attempt to listen to what you didn't fully hear the first time. Jung reminded us, the unconscious does not disappear when ignored. It waits. And it waits in patterns, in dreams, in moments of sudden memory, in names that rise uninvited from the depths. Not to bind you to the past, but to guide you back to a moment where you abandoned part of yourself. Neville Goddard taught that whatever we give emotional attention to becomes real. But this does not mean we must repress emotion. It means we must give true attention, sacred, conscious, symbolic, so that we are not ruled by unconscious longing. The name that returns does not ask for silence. It asks for presence, not to be spoken to, but to be heard through. The next time the name comes, do not answer with urgency. Do not answer with shame. Pause softly and ask not, why are they still here? But, what part of me is still waiting to be claimed? Because healing is not forgetting. Healing is remembering differently, listening to the echo until it softens and becomes a doorway. Not to the past, but to the self you left behind when you thought the story ended. Like answering a knock at the door and realizing it was never someone else waiting outside. It was something sacred inside you, finally ready to be seen. Some names don't leave because they were never just names. They were portals, symbols, emotional signatures of something sacred that tried to reach you once through the shape of someone else. This is not about obsession. It is about retrieval. The soul doesn't repeat for no reason. It repeats what was not resolved, what was not understood, what still lives in the unseen folds of your memory as a story incomplete. And so the name reappears, not to drag you backward, but to pull you deeper. It may not be their presence you need to release, but the illusion that they were the meaning. Listen, not to the name as a person, but to what it symbolizes, a version of you that came alive in their mirror, a desire that still breathes beneath the ache, a thread that never fully made its way back into your hands. This is the art of symbolic differentiation, to release the person but keep the meaning, to honor the echo without becoming its captive, to hear the name and ask gently, What is this name inside me still trying to tell? Because healing is not the absence of memory. Healing is memory infused with clarity, softness, and soul. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And Neville Goddard, what we imagine with feeling becomes our reality. So perhaps the name that keeps returning isn't trying to bring you back to someone else. Perhaps it's inviting you forward, into the self you abandoned while trying to hold on. Not to repeat the story, but to remember it more wisely, not to go back, but to finally come home to yourself.